So as a reference point, XYZ's front and rear, that's a 19. Here's the exact spec. 245, 40, R19. And I mean, there's plenty of clearance. It's not gonna rub at all on the back. The back's all good. And that's a 19. The front, a little bit of a different story. That's basically what you got at the front. And up here is another issue. So that's a 19-inch rim, and that actually rubs against the plastic up there when the car's at full lock. But other than full lock, it's actually alright. So I probably wouldn't go bigger than 19s on this car, but that's your choice. That's the first thing. So second point is that this is pretty much as high as the XYZs can go. They don't go any higher, so basically you'd be pretty ballsy to run 20s, because that's not going any higher than that. And you know, that's not going any, the car's not lifting anymore, because it's pretty much as high as it can get. I mean, you got plenty of room at the front. You know, you're not gonna scrape anything going over speed bumps and that, but yeah, the car's not gonna get any higher, so 19s probably be the max. Okay, so the next part would be how the fronts work. So this is what they actually look like. They come with a sway bar linkage, which is pretty good, but basically, like, you're not really meant to play with this collar. That's the spring preload collar. You basically just set it at what they tell you. The actual height adjustment of where the car's body sits is done via this, the body of the strut. Basically, you turn it in, makes the car go lower because this will get shorter, and you turn it, you roll it down the other way to make the car go higher, but it's also got a minimum and a maximum range. Where you just saw where the tires were on the car, this is basically the like where the shaft is at its absolute like minimum, basically. So you can screw it further in, but then your car's going to get lower. With regards to if you have your original strut tower, here has a much fatter sort of plate here where the spring sits in it. The issue with that being is that if you go 18-inch rims, you'll probably be all right. If you go 19-inch rims, and these are 8.5 wide, if you go 8 inches wide, you'll probably be okay. If you go 8.5 inches wide and 19-inch rims, the actual tire will rub on the strut tower, the factory strut tower. So if you're going to go tires as big as these or bigger, you pretty much have to do a coilover setup, because it'll rub. Now, adjusting the camber, the dampener on these, it's pretty straightforward. It's all done from this point, and you just stick this. No, you don't stick any yellow rings or anything on it. It's just this on its own. Gets shoved down this hole, and basically turn to the right, stiffens your suspension. Turn to the left, softens your suspension. Now you'll actually hear very little faint clicks when you do it. And basically, yeah, it's pretty straightforward to do. I feel like you don't feel the fluid and all that doesn't settle how it's supposed to, unless you make the adjustment and then jack the car, take all the weight off your suspension, and then put it back down again, and then it'll be in its correct thing. Trying to adjust the suspension when the car's on the ground, it either takes longer to come into effect, or it doesn't come into effect at all until all the weight's off the suspension. So that's how it feels doing the adjustment, basically. Now, the rear is different. than the front. It's not a true coilover setup because you've got your coil spring separate from your shock. This is pretty inferior design in my opinion. It's not as good as the front. Furthermore, you're probably going to need to replace your standard lower spring insulator with a polyurethane one like this, because this spring isn't as wide as the factory one and it doesn't quite coil nicely around this part in the middle. So the polyurethane helps the coil spring bed into this so it doesn't move as much when you're driving. For reference, this is the way, this is at the top. When I first put this on, I swapped it the other way around. My Bridgestone corrected that for me. So that's at the top, that's at the bottom. I really don't rate this setup. I don't think it's much better than your factory setup. The good thing, I mean, the quality of the shock would obviously be better, but it's not that much noticeable. It's still really, the only thing that's better is that this spring is much stiffer. So yeah, once again, the height is adjusted from this collar, turning the collar further into or down from the shaft. What else would I say? It's basically, I wouldn't recommend getting the rear, really. It's not really worth it for the money. I would say just maybe buy a new shocky. If your rear suspension's very like boaty, I would probably just buy a new shocky, standard one, and then maybe a lowering spring because it's just a bit stiffer, but don't go super low if it's gonna rub. So just the not the lowering spring because it's lower, just the lowering spring because it's much stiffer. Because yeah, this setup, aside from obviously being stiffer and less body roll, it's not that much better than your existing one. You could just run a stiffer spring and pretty much get the exact same effect. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend the back. I'd recommend buying only the fronts, really. Adjusting the rear camber, sorry, not camber, the rear dampener is done through here. Same drill. Stick this down the shaft, 36 clicks of movement, of stiffness, all the way to the left is as soft as possible, all the way to the right is as stiff as possible. Just last little footnotes would be that these are better than a real cheapo set from China. So, you know, these are better than your bloody Max Peating rods, but obviously they're probably not as good as your MCAs. And the main reason that would be you get height adjustment, not that much height adjustment surprisingly. People think you get a crap load of height adjustment. These you don't. You basically get, like where that is sitting, it's probably sitting about there in the it's screwed that far in. Realistically, you're probably only going to get about that much more thread from that neck there to there. That's probably all the thread that's within its range to sit in. Any more than that, you're becoming into dangerous territory. So you only really get maybe, I don't know, in total, that much adjustment. You don't get to stick this all the way up here and really slam your car. You can't do that with how it's designed. And also you get dampener adjustment, which is stiffness. To be fair, like the stiffest setting on these is really stiff. Like it's stiffer than lowering springs, which is insane. But the softest setting, yeah, it's nowhere near as soft as you'd want it to be. And then the other thing is, yeah, these don't have camber adjustment. So when you have something like your MCAs, which are the more expensive ones, you get camber. You don't get camber adjustment on these. So if that's something, if you're into drifting or you really want to go to the next level, yeah, camber adjustment will be the next thing. And yeah, these things do not have camber adjustment. which is disappointing considering they're $1,600 front and rear. Yeah, so overall, this setup, front and rear XYZs, set you back $1,600 here in WA. I really wouldn't recommend it. It's better stuff to spend your money on. If you want to put bigger tires on like these, you'll get to a point where you have to at least put coilovers on the front, which I would say, yes, do it, because bigger tires, better cornering, better grip. So yeah, my opinion, buy the fronts, put your bigger tires on, buy lowering springs for the rear, and be done with it. Maybe replace your rear shock with just a standard one, be cheaper than buying this sort of thing. And yeah, it won't be as boaty in your, it won't be as mushy on the rear end. Because yeah, I don't feel much difference at all in the rear end, especially in absorbing the shocks. I had lowering springs in this before I put these in. It feels just as stiff with lowering springs as it does with these. The fronts, because it's a proper coilover setup, definitely does feel better than the lowering springs. And when you do adjust the dampener all the way down, it is definitely a much softer ride. So the ability to adjust the dampener on the fly, you know, you go onto the track, you can just turn the dampener up when you go on the track and then turn it back down on the street, is a lot better. But be under no illusions that the softest setting on these is still nowhere near factory, and it's still a pretty stiff ride. Yeah, it's not a comfortable ride, that's for sure. It's not like you're going to be able to just turn them all the way up and then back down again and think it's going to be like factory suspension, because it's not. Yeah, so I would save yourself some coin, buy the fronts only, put bigger tires on, spend your money elsewhere, brakes. Yeah, because the rear setup is just not the best. And I don't think that's any fault of XYZ. I think that's just the way Holden designed it, with a separate spring and shock setup. And yeah, that's probably about it.